Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the week beginning Monday, the 11th of May. And joining me on this edition is Steve Withers.
If you live another day, I will be very impressed.
Cas Harlow.
I blew up the building.
Ed Selley.
I think you just fired yourself.
And our special guest this evening, Craig Cunningham.
You know, you'd be surprised how a nice pair of edible panties can make a guy feel sexy.
Good. I was wondering if anybody was going to use that one. Well done.
I was thinking about using it, and I thought, I don't know. So thanks, Craig.
So yeah, we're live again tonight on the YouTube channel. We're also recording the podcast for it to go out normally as an audio podcast. So however you want to see the podcast, and obviously this one will be available all week as well. But we are live. We'll have a Q&A section at the end of the podcast this evening. So if you want to ask us any questions, the AVForums team any questions, then that's the time to do it. It'll be towards the end. We'll give you fair warning as we come up to that. Otherwise, it's the same format that we always use for the AVForums podcast. And for those of you who are listening to the audio-only version, hopefully the quality is going to be better this week because I have the call recorder running, although it missed the start of the podcast, but I'll fix that in post. We can do those types of things. We're not too bad. We've also been working hard this week. Stuart has been working incredibly hard this week. Behind the scenes, he's also here again producing us this evening. We're going to try and catch him out, see how quick he is at getting photographs up and so on. But we did have issues with Echo last week. We're hoping that the Echo has gone this week. We're hoping that we've managed to fix that issue. So please let us know in the chat section if you're watching live, if there's any issues with the audio, and we'll see what we can do. And please remember to subscribe if you are watching us live on YouTube. It does help the YouTube channel. It helps us climb up the search rankings and so on. And it also means that we can widen our audience to people who are taking part, asking questions and so on of the podcast. So please do click on the subscribe. Also click the bell and it will notify you every time we upload new video content to our YouTube channel. Also, if you want to listen to the audio-only version, remember you can subscribe through your podcast provider for that. So iTunes, Spotify, and so on. We're available across the whole board of podcast providers, so you'll be able to find us there as well. And new to us, and we're still getting the hang of it, although Steve has managed to get this absolutely bang on when he talks about subscribing and hitting the bell and donating. Donating, it's a new thing for us. So if you do feel like donating, and I see that Stephen Huxtable has just done that.
That's a question for Craig, I think.
Yeah, we will come to your question, Stephen. Thank you very much for your donation. If you want to donate, the link is in the description underneath the video. And there's also this super chat feature. If you find the super chat feature, it pins your comment to the top. Also, you make a small donation to the channel. That's, perfect. And we will come to your question if you do a super chat or any donation. We'll definitely answer your questions. There's a couple I need to thank from last week. Steve, why don't you do it? Because you were the guy that was selling it. So why don't you mention who's donated?
All right, hang on. I need to put up the...
Yeah, you can see how organised people are here.
Mike Linos? Mikolinos donated £11. Thank you very much. Love the podcast, guys. One of the audio highlights of the week. So thank you very much. Very kind of you. And Russell Graham, super chat, £5. He's got a question. I can't decide if I should upgrade my TV from an LG B6 to an LG C10 or close your ears, Craig, or buy a soundbar SL9Y. Any advice?
Yeah, buy a C9.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't bother buying a C10. Just get a C9.
Yeah,
it's cheaper.
Absolutely.
It's got more features.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephen Huxtable, his question was, what's the future of 8K? We're going to come on to that because it is a good question for Craig, because Samsung have really jumped in with the whole 8K thing, so we'll come to that. Okay, so let's introduce Craig. For those of you who perhaps don't know, Craig has been featuring on the channel quite a bit in our videos, video interviews, and you have swapped companies recently, Craig, so why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Firstly, thank you very much for having me. It's always a great pleasure of mine to be able to talk to you guys. So yeah, I mean, I've been in the industry for, I think it's about 13 years now. 11 of that I spent at Panasonic, and I'm now in my second year with Samsung, specifically working in the TV division, focusing on product development, product strategy.
Excellent. So we're going to come on and talk TVs in a little while, talk about what Samsung are doing and so on with the year ahead. And it was supposed to be a big year, which hasn't quite happened the way it's supposed to happen. So we're going to come on and discuss that a little bit later. And talking about that, once again, we do it every week on the podcast, and I'm going to do it again this week. Thank you very much to our frontline workers out there. Whatever it is that you are doing, keeping things going, whether you work in health or the providing services through the economy or whatever, if you're out working on the front line, thank you very much. It is appreciated from everybody on the podcast. Right, so what have we been doing this week? I'm going to go Ed first. Ed, what have you been doing?
Amazingly, I've been doing a lot sitting on my sofa, Phil. It's kind of a recurring theme. I have been doing some work for you, been doing some work for other people. I've listened to an awful lot of music. I have barely turned the television on in the last 7 days, which is great for an AV podcast. And as I noted on Twitter this morning, I've done my annual reread of Tom Clancy's Red Storm Rising, because it, as I said in the tweet, it harks back to a simpler, happier time where only the Third World War was a problem. It's one of those guilty pleasure books. I mean, all of that sort of genre is the sort of literary equivalent of a Big Mac, but that's a really, really good Big Mac. So yeah, I finished that late last night, and very satisfying it was too. So that's all good. That is about the summation of my achievements up until this point.
Okay, good stuff. Let's move over to Steve. Steve, you been up to much?
Well, as promised in last week's podcast, I finished my review of the Samsung Q95T, which you kindly put up. I think it was on Wednesday or Thursday. Did a bit of work for a few other sites, and I spent a lot of time in the garden because the weather's been gorgeous the last few days. So not today, I have to say, but until today at least, it's been very nice. So been in the garden quite a bit, did a bit of gardening, just relaxed, slept. It was nice, very pleasant.
Yep. I think the heating's going on tonight.
Yeah, the heating has been on today. It's very parky, and the wind blowing a gale right now.
Yeah, well, it's a northerly, isn't it? And it's just, and I'm a bit further north, and it's a lot colder up here probably than it is down here, but it's really changed in the last few days. It was so hot the other day, and I'm sick and tired of the stripe that was on my car. It got so hot, I went out and I removed the stripe from the car. I just lifted it up and it came away because it had obviously been baking in the sun. And I've got to say, I much prefer it without the stripe on there. It was a bit of an offset, so it had a thick and then a thin, instead of having like two thin and one thick up the middle and so on. I'm talking about stripes. Removed those. What else have I been doing? Been doing quite a bit of work. Been filming today in the cinema room, which is good because I've been using a projector in there to film, and it heated the room up, so I didn't need the heating on in the cinema room. So I've been doing that this week, and lots and lots and lots of testing. It's been a testing week after our Echo last week, so that's what we've been up to. Cas?
Oh, yeah, we have done a lot of that.
Yeah, we have done testing. Oh, I think I mentioned it when we were doing testing, but it was my birthday this week. So
happy 50th.
Yes. To the point you wish me a happy 50th, and now everyone thinks I'm 50. So
are you not 50?
No. So everyone's been promptly asking
How
me.
old are you, out of curiosity?
42.
It's been a tough 42 years, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So everyone was like,
the very fact is you saying that, a man
I
who
think
looks
I
like
look
his
pretty
head
good
has
for
been
53.
Well, other than the fact the top of your head's been sandblasted.
Yeah, but it's been like that since I was 25, so that's not really much I can do about that.
Yeah. So yeah. So that was my birthday, and my 50th apparently.
Okay. And we're going to come on to what Craig does in a sec. So why don't we go on to competitions, Cas?
Sure. You can win copies of Criterion's May titles on Blu-ray. That closes 19th of May. You can win a copy of Jumanji: The Next Level on Blu-ray. That closes 19th of May as well. Win a copy of Rio Grande on Blu-ray. That's 20th of May. A copy of Fistful of Dynamite on Blu-ray, that's 29th of May, and The Thousand Eyes of Dr. Mabuse on Blu-ray, which closes 31st of May. You can win a copy of Sea Fever on Blu-ray, that's 2nd of June, and a copy of The Boys Season 1 on Blu-ray, which closes 9th of June. You can also win a Yamaha YAS-109 Simple all-in-one soundbar. That closes 21st of May. All competitions open to eligible AVForums members resident in the UK.
Okay,
Basically everyone
and
except Phil.
yeah, that's it. Any previous winners, Cas?
We do. Yes, Night 76 won a copy of Eureka's A Long Day's Journey into Night, ironically, on Blu-ray. Tiberian 9 won a copy of 21 Bridges on Blu-ray. And if you're listening, Tiberian, that's in the post to you today.
Excellent, good stuff. Well done to our winners. Lots of competitions there for you to enter, and we will be back in a second with hardware. And hardware section. As we say, we've got Craig Cunningham on this evening from Samsung. Craig, welcome to the podcast. People will know who you are. You've been on plenty of our videos over the years, talking about TV. It is your speciality. So maybe give people a little bit of an insight to your actual job at Samsung. What is it that you're doing there?
So the biggest part of the role is product development. So working closely with the team in HQ in Suwon on product strategy. So what products we're currently bringing to the market, what the future roadmap looks like, and just how to position our products to ensure that we are kind of maximizing their capabilities. I think those would be the overall arching day-to-day in my role at Samsung.
And obviously, it's a massive company. So, how many steps does a TV go through in terms of development? Yeah,
I mean, it's huge, and even it took me by surprise. I was in the industry obviously for quite a few years before this, but it's a completely different level of scale and structure. Many different steps and many different stakeholders. A lot of the products are global now, so you have input from most regions in the world as to what's important for them. Where possible, you try to make sure that a product is all encompassing, but then you have many local specific type products, derivatives that are important for that region. So depending on how complex, it can go through many different stages over the years of development. I mean, any product that you see come to the market is never just 1 year's worth of development. There's always a lot that's gone into that. 3 years, 5 years, etc.
Sorry, Craig, how long could a product be in development before we finally see it in a store? Say, for example, the TVs that are coming out this year. I mean, when did Samsung really start working on them?
Well, I think it depends on how complex they are and what the feedback is from potential end consumers. I mean, this was something that really surprised me about Samsung, because I think when you look at Samsung from the outside, you just see this huge corporation, but the amount of time that the company invests in not just R&D, but actually getting feedback directly from end consumers on what they would like the TVs to be like, what their pain points are, what we can do to improve their viewing experience. So lots of new technologies are tested directly with consumers through various focus groups in order to then eventually bring them to the market. There's normally a good solid amount of testing and research behind any feature that's developed. So based on that, it can take 3 years, or it can be a simple change over year to year. I mean, there's a mixture of that within the 2020 lineup.
So talking about 2020, it hasn't gone to plan, Craig. So how are you and Samsung dealing with COVID at the minute, and what kind of impact is it having in terms of the 2020 lineup and the business, basically?
I guess like most industries, just kind of trying to adapt almost on a daily and weekly basis. It's a very fast-moving, ever-changing situation. So we're just doing our best to work with our consumers, our retail partners, in order to be there and deliver the service that's appropriate at the time. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to predict. And in my role, because I'm kind of spread across most of the countries in Europe, it's also a very different situation by region. The market in recent weeks seems to have improved, seems to have come back. It's still negative versus last year, which is obviously not what we were expecting when we were originally planning 2020. With the Euro, this would have been pre-Euro sell-in period right now. It would have been it would have been significantly higher than what we're currently seeing. But that's now to be expected. And then we just have to take all of the information that's coming in on a daily basis to try and figure out what the market's going to be like going forward into the next weeks and months. Is the market gonna come back significantly in the summertime, or if this situation continues, it could be delayed even further. So that's like a constant guessing game for us right now. I mean, Samsung as a company, first and foremost, what they've done is made sure all of the employees are safe. We've been working from home now for quite a while, which has been quite a challenge. It's been very different for me, but slowly but surely getting used to it. Spending almost every hour of the day, it seems, on video calls. So that has its own challenges. Yeah, so that's kind of the situation as it is right now, and I think consumers are changing their shopping habits. I mean, they're having to do that, right? People are buying a lot more online. I mean, to give you an example, in the TV industry, normally 20% roughly, if you take as an average across Europe, is sold online. That's at 70% right now. So that whole consumer journey is completely changed.
Craig, presumably the other 30% is what, supermarkets, because the other retail channels are so essentially buttoned down, and they're only slowly reopening in Europe now. So, I mean, is there a story within a story there? I mean, are there more sales through retail channels that wouldn't necessarily normally have been doing that much for you?
Yeah, that's definitely fair to say. I mean, there are some countries that aren't quite in the same level of lockdown that we're in, so they are still seeing sales go through traditional retailers. But yeah, I think supermarkets, hypermarkets. I think these types of channels are still selling in some countries. What that does to the TV sale right now is we're seeing quite a boom in, you'd call it like kind of leader class, entry class type products. I think as consumers are buying second and third sets, with a lot of family at home, children, etc. Multiple sets are being sold. So I think it's quite a change on the dynamic of the market, and it's just, again, a bit of a guessing game as to what's the market going to be like as we start to go through this process and lockdown eases. Will consumers now be much more comfortable shopping online? I mean, for a lot of people, this would have been a new experience. For my parents were never really big at online purchases, but they've had no choice over the last few weeks.
So
that's it.
The big push, Craig, this year was going to be 8K, and obviously what was going to help you push that this year was going to be the Olympics in Japan, being the first major sporting event to not broadcast in the UK, but broadcast in some sections of the world in 8K. That's obviously been moved to next year. The Euros have been moved to next year. And you have obviously lots of 8K TVs coming to market. So what kind of impact does that have on your message trying to get 8K across this year to the consumer?
Well, I mean, at the moment, with stores closed, and lots of stores, lots of premium retailers are currently not selling. And for those types of products, the majority are sold in store. Consumers need demonstrations of those types of products for the most part. And as much as we are working on improving that journey online, I think if you're making a purchase of thousands of pounds, normally you want to see it. So that slows not only 8K, but it slows the premium market, and we can see that. I mean, TVs that are above £2,000, let's say, in value, that market is 40% down versus last year. Whereas TVs of under £1,000, that market is actually up versus last year. So because of that's obviously putting a bit of a challenge on the first kind of half of this year. And then going forward, I don't think the Olympics will have a huge impact on 8K sales for us. I think it's because I think everybody knows native 8K content actually is limited right now. So I think the sales that we're making of 8K TVs are more for the total product proposition, whether that's industry-leading HDR or it's the processing. There are many different reasons. I don't think it's solely just for the resolution. So the impact of the 8K sales aspiration will come from the market being a bit smaller, I think, in the first half. how the market comes back in the second half will probably really determine whether we can, meet the expectations we were originally looking for.
And does this mean that, obviously, you listened in when we spoke to Paul Gray, and I understand that you speak to Paul on quite a regular basis. He mentioned that he thought some manufacturers would extend the product life cycle. So rather than, swapping a 20 for a 21 model, you might actually run the models a bit longer. Is that something that may happen?
I think it will be inevitable that there will be 2019 stock running on longer this year, because all manufacturers would have been planning a bigger sales period right now. And a lot of the procurement in our industry happens quite far in advance, particularly for the non-panel maker manufacturers. So I'm expecting that there will be 2019 models lasting a little longer, probably into end of the summer even. What that does to 2021 is anyone's guess. I mean, we're going to come into quite an interesting cycle now, because we also have the World Cup, the 2022, which is at a different time of the year as well, which will coincide with that kind of peak selling Black Friday type period. So who knows what that will look like for 2021. I can only speak on behalf of Samsung, obviously, and we are pretty much at the stage to roll out all of our 2020 models. So I don't think it's not going to have any impact on us in terms of getting the new lineup out there. But what that means for 2021, we'll have to wait and see.
And have you gone with 8K too early? I know it's a cheeky question, but you have moved to 8K for your premium TVs now. 4K, the models are not as advanced because that's not your top models now. The 8K models have all the new features and so on. So some may be saying that you've gone a little bit early, because you said it earlier on, there's not a lot of native content out there.
I think when it comes to the product proposition that we make for our premium televisions, we try to place them into the appropriate market segments, and we try to give them the evolution of technology that we feel is appropriate. In terms of native 8K content, for sure it's in the pipeline. We've seen many examples of it already, and we have next generation gaming consoles quite quickly going to be available. So no, I don't think that there's always a manufacturer that has to lead. And we have taken it upon ourselves to do that for 8K. And we believe that is where the market will go, and that's where the future lies for us. So no, I don't think it's too early, and I think 8K TV sales will make up a large majority of our premium aspirations for 2020. But it's not just us. I mean, if you look at the other manufacturers as well, they're all now bringing 8K lineups, more screen sizes than they did previously. So we're probably just 1 or 2 years ahead at the moment.
And one final from me, and then we'll spread the questions out a little bit. But you know which one's coming, because I asked you this at CES and a number of times. Dolby Vision. You have not gone Dolby Vision or Atmos. Has opinion on that changed any going forward, or is that still going to be the case that you still don't support Dolby Vision?
Well, it's certainly the case for 2020. I do get asked this question quite a lot, and I knew I would get asked it again tonight. So I thought, and every time I answer it, I don't think I do the question justice. So I thought about it a bit more today, and I'm going to give my personal answer on this, because actually for the last few years before I joined Samsung, I was actually part of the Panasonic team which pioneered the development of Dolby Vision and HDR10 Plus in a single model. So I only have positive things to say about Dolby Vision. The Samsung view, or the other side of that, is there's a focus that needs to be put onto the inherent capabilities of the product. And I think where Samsung is leading is trying to avoid, to the most part, the need for tone mapping. I think Steve actually picked it up really well in his recent review of the Q95. The Q95 doesn't have to apply any tone mapping to content graded at 1000 nits. And that's a large amount of content. And if you look at the flagship end of the Samsung range, even content that's graded at 4000, there is a lot less for the television to have to do with regards to mapping than what there would be for other technologies, other manufacturers. So you can see the Samsung approach then of what do you think is better, a TV that can deliver the entirety of the source content, or a television which has some support for dynamic metadata, but is actually having to map apply a lot of mapping in order to somehow replicate the look and feel of the source content. I mean, it really depends on which view you feel is the best, and the Samsung view is being able to map the majority of the source content is the right direction.
Yeah, I can vouch for. I mean, the thing is, that's fine at the high end. Yeah, the sort of the flagship TVs, which can do very high nit values and therefore don't have to apply much tone mapping. What about sort of the middle range TVs, the sort of the lower and middle range TVs, where something like Dolby Vision could add value in terms of, you know, they aren't that bright compared to the higher end models. And also, I think a lot of consumers will, you know, tick boxes when they're going into a store, and they'll ask, you know, has it got this, has it got that? And there's no doubt in my mind that you do lose sales to some people just because you haven't got Dolby Vision, and they want that, even if it doesn't necessarily you don't need it, because the TV itself has got a very high nit value, and you know, doesn't apply much tone mapping or any tone mapping in certain circumstances. You know, what about further down the line, or what about the sales that are lost from box tickers, basically?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think there will always be a type of consumer that will look to tick the boxes, and if that's the consumer preference, then it's you know, it's hard for us if we at least can't do physical demonstrations, or we can't educate. And give the example that I've just given, then yeah, for sure we will lose sales. But we have to remember is any time that we build a television, or any time that any manufacturer builds a television, there is a cost for everything that goes into that television, and it's our job to make sure that we create the best proposition for the market. So if you add something in, ultimately the consumer has to pay for it, and we take that decision to make sure that, you know, those TVs are optimized for the positions of the market that they facilitate. So, and again, I agree. I think the tone mapping, or the metadata, dynamic metadata support, I think further down the lineup is where the consumer can benefit most. And that's why HDR10 Plus was always a great initiative, because of the way it was structured. It allowed manufacturers to really incorporate that on the entirety of their lineup. Dolby Vision is a little bit harder. You know, chipset capability also becomes important at that stage, and that's why, if you look at the other manufacturers are using that, it isn't brought down for the entirety of their lineup. Whereas for us, if you're buying a product like a 7000 series, so an entry UHD product from Samsung, you are getting HDR10 Plus. So you are getting that support that the TV needs in order to overcome the peak brightness.
And what about Atmos, Craig? Because obviously you've introduced a fantastic audio system, which Steve highlighted again in his review recently, but it doesn't support Atmos, which is obviously, again, looking at it as an outsider, Craig, it seems like a missed opportunity there, really, with the technology.
Yeah, and it's the same story as Dolby Vision. I mean, that's the philosophy of Samsung, and they believe that is the right way for us to, you know, take the market leadership position that we take. There will always be a case to why not include everything. You could include everything all the time, and it would never stop. So, you know, ultimately the company has to make a decision on what it believes is the right product proposition, and that's where we are right now. And you know, I think now that I've been on both sides, it's the consumers that have the choice there. I wouldn't say that there's a right or wrong way to go.
Craig, there's been there was some announcements just before COVID hit. Basically, there was an announcement that Samsung Display is no longer going to be manufacturing LCD TVs. Now, I know that your Samsung Electronics will actually make the TV. So how does that affect Samsung Electronics in terms of its plans going forward?
It was always on the roadmap. It wasn't a surprise when the news broke. You know, supply chains are optimized to continue to ensure that we are the market leader, so no impact at all. Instead, Samsung Display will be gearing up for the next generation. So I think that's only positive news for us when those roadmaps are, you know, eventually made public.
One quick question. This is something that came up from my review last week. Perhaps you could just clarify exactly what the HDMI ports on the TVs can do, and how they're structured in terms of which ones do which.
You mean with regards to HDMI 2.1 support?
Yeah. Well, yes, basically.
Yeah, so I think the product that you reviewed last week, the Q95. So Q95 supports all of the major functions of HDMI 2.1. So as a manufacturer, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to list those supports. So we've made sure that that model, as well as Q80 and every model that's above that, will support high frame rate, ALLM, EARC, VRR. All the major components of HDMI 2.1 are supported.
Is that on every HDMI port or just one?
No, it's on one HDMI port.
And do you know which port it is?
Yeah, I'll send you the details afterwards. I'm sure I have a full spec sheet lying around here.
I have been asked a few times because even on the 8K TVs, one of the ports was a full bandwidth HDMI 2.1 port, but it didn't actually show on the One Connect box which one it was, so it was a complete guess. It does identify the EARC port, which is port 3, I think.
Yeah, HDMI 3, I think.
Yeah, but not the one that's the fully spec'd one.
I think it's 4.
I think it's 4 as well, but it doesn't say anything on the box.
Right. Okay.
So that would be quite useful feedback for future generations.
I'll be sure to feed that one back.
Just to wrap up our little segment here, obviously there is a chat window. I'm sure you'll look at that while we go through and pick out anything that you think's of interest. But just to wrap up on this section before we move on to the reviews, I just wanted to finally come to, you know what, it's just gone right out of my head. I've got so many things going on. And I had the question in my head and it's just gone completely. And I don't know why.
I've got something whilst you
go on, Ed.
Craig, obviously, I think it goes outside your sort of paid remit, but obviously Samsung now has a huge collection of audio brands and hardware in the form of Harman International. In terms of, is that been something that's sort of been allowed to sort of continue in its own particular sort of direction with sort of little intervention, or has there been an element of knocking heads together and starting to make it work for the wider brand thing? I mean, I noticed that AKG has begun to tie itself more visibly and more apparent and sort of more readily to Samsung Mobile. But I mean, presumably when you've got, socking great horn-loaded JBLs, you just sort of let JBL continue to do what they do, or is there a sort of grand plan?
Honestly, I'm not close enough to the audio team on that one. I would love to give you an answer, but no, I'm not close enough to the details to give you any confident answer on that one.
It's better than guessing. It is better than guessing. I did that whilst working for a multinational corporation. It never goes down well. So yeah, my sympathies.
Yeah.
It's come back to me now. It's old age, you see. I forget things when so basically, I want you to just to wrap up as to how important is consumer feedback to Samsung, especially consumers like the AVForums audience who are a little bit more switched on when it comes to TVs, a little bit more enthusiastic about picture quality and so on. Because one of your messages at CES, which surprised me because I thought it was a bit of a change of direction for you, was accuracy and putting up your TV against the broadcast monitor and actually pushing for accuracy with especially HDR in terms of following the PQEOTF standard, ST2084 standard. So is that a big push for you this year? And are you listening to the feedback that's coming in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me personally, I've always been a big follower of sites like this one. So I think this is where you can get some invaluable consumer feedback. And Samsung as a corporation definitely takes consumer feedback. As I mentioned earlier, there's a huge amount of time dedicated to listening to consumers and trying to find innovative solutions. Things like the One Connect box. I always looked at that from the outside and kind of wondered. And now that I've been part of Samsung, I can realize, how much that's appreciated by the consumer segment that it was targeted for. It's just things like that, and having products like the Frame and having the Serif and the Cero. These are all designed, developed, created with consumer segments in mind, and those are not just made up. They're real people that have influenced the product. And I know sometimes it can be it can be quite frustrating, particularly for the enthusiasts. You know, I read a lot of the comments, but the company does listen and really believes that the product proposition it brings to the market is one which meets the consumer's needs. And there's always room for improvement. I mean, there is no perfect TV. I think we've said that many times. We might get close with micro LED, but let's see. But I think, from my experience so far on Samsung, I can say definitely a company that, despite its size, is very humble and listens to consumer feedback.
Good stuff. So, like I say, we need to move on because obviously we're up against the clock and we're trying to keep everything compact. But the questions are coming in, I can see on the chat window as well. So you maybe want to keep an eye on that, Craig. And obviously join in with the rest of the podcast because we're going to be talking movies after the reviews. So we're going to go to Steve, who's been looking at a soundbar. Now, Steve, you've been looking at lots of soundbars from lots of companies, but this Dolby Atmos enabled one comes from Sharp, and Sharp they haven't really dipped their toe that much in the soundbar market up until now.
No, they haven't. Obviously, I think that predominantly we know them as a TV manufacturer, especially very large TVs. Also a big pioneer of 8K. They were pushing 8K even before Samsung was. But Sharp has changed hands a few times in the last few years, more times I think than property in a game of Monopoly. They've, I think they're now owned by, is it Foxconn? I think it's Foxconn that owns them now. But this, yeah, you're right, Phil. This is their first sort of foray into the soundbar market. So I was really curious to see, what they got, because only recently I'd been reviewing the Vizio soundbar. Now, Vizio make a lot of soundbars, particularly in the US, not so much over here. And it was a great soundbar from Vizio. It didn't necessarily look the coolest. It was a bit old-fashioned in terms of its design, but much like the Q90R from last year and previous generations from Samsung, it comes with rear speakers, and having rear speakers makes a massive difference. As we were talking about last week on the podcast, when you don't have that, when you've got that hole behind you in terms of Atmos immersion, it just isn't there. It tends to be much more loaded to the front of the room. And so Samsung's soundbar does that. Actually, it also has upward firing drivers behind you as well, which makes a huge difference. I mean, that's a proper Atmos experience. When it comes to the Vizio, there aren't the upward firing drivers behind you, but there are rear speakers. They are wired, but you do have rear speakers, which obviously helps in terms of immersion. The Sharp, which is the HT-SBW800, is a Dolby Atmos soundbar, but it doesn't come with rear speakers. So it's just you've got 3 channels at the front, plus side firing drivers, and you've got 2 upward firing drivers, and you've also got a wireless subwoofer. And I've got to say, for a first effort, I thought it was really good. It's nicely designed, well made, quite sleek in its design, and in terms of delivering, granted, like I said a minute ago, any soundbar that doesn't have any rear speakers is going to be very front heavy. And like this is obviously quite front heavy. The sound is very much focused at the front of the room. The front third of the room basically is where the majority of the sound resides. But in terms of delivering overhead effects, did that very well. The side firing drivers give it a bit more width in terms of the front soundstage, so it works well even with a large TV. And the wireless subwoofer is well integrated. And yeah, I was actually genuinely surprised at how good it was. It's £549. So it's in the kind of the middle bracket in terms of price point. That's probably about average, I'd say, for an Atmos soundbar. And it was quite a solid little entry into the market. And there's been quite a few recent additions. Like I said, Vizio, JBL have just announced an Atmos soundbar as well, 9.1 channel. And so I think this is definitely an area of the market that's growing, quite competitive. It's interesting that not just this soundbar, but most of the soundbars that I see that do support Atmos don't support DTSX. That's not the case with say the Samsung soundbar, the Q90R, but certainly a lot of these mid-price products, like the Vizio and like this Sharp product, don't support DTSX, and I think that's quite common because ultimately DTSX isn't that big a format in terms of immersive audio. Really, it's only available on Blu-rays and some 4K discs, whereas obviously Atmos is used heavily in terms of streaming delivered by Dolby Digital Plus. So I can see why they've concentrated on that. rather than including DTS. Obviously, for the point of view of the enthusiast and AVForums member, they might well want DTSX because they have a large disc collection. But I think anyone who streams a lot and most of their content comes via some streaming service, be it Apple or Disney Plus or Netflix or even Amazon, then you're going to be getting Dolby Atmos. So Atmos is the important thing, and this is what it does.
Steve, I might have missed it, but does it have enhanced ARC?
I'm just going to double check that. I don't think it does.
Right.
Hang on.
Well,
Okay.
Steve checked.
No, it's regular ARC.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, I noticed that Russell, who donated to the podcast, you've popped up in the chat asking the same question, because I'm assuming that you were watching that other bloke doing his podcast, Johnson or whatever. But we've answered you at the start of the podcast, so contain yourself and rewind a time convenient to yourself. And we've given it's a short but emphatic answer. So yeah, don't worry about it.
So to wrap up on the Sharp, Steve, what was your score? Did you give it a badge or anything?
Yes, recommended 8 out of 10.
Okay. I always like to put my reviewers on the spot. And
I hadn't really thought about the badge at that point.
Right. So that's reviews for this week, and we're going to go to Ed now because Ed's written another fantastic piece for the site. It's not live just yet if you're watching live. It will be going up this week though, and Ed's picked out 50 essential albums for lockdown listening. So we're not going to go through all 50 of them because obviously, like we say, there is an article going up this week. You can go through at your own pleasure, and I'm assuming, Ed, that you've put some kind of playlist together, or there will be ways
I can attach a playlist to go with it, which will probably be unimaginatively simply feature a track from each album chosen by me in a consecutive basis. We covered some of the details off on this on the first video podcast that we did. I took the decision that I didn't want to go the ultra obscure route, tell you about, Peruvian nose flute artists and all the rest of it. And then I also, perhaps erroneously, as Phil pointed out, didn't want to go down the major hits of a specific decades. I figured that it's not that hard to work out who some of these acts are. So it's a middle ground. It's not intended for, I'm hoping of the 50 albums, I would have thought that any given person reading it should be familiar, at least in passing, with the names of them, with about 20 to 25 of them. They'll be different 20 to 25, depending on your age and your interests. I've tried to cover off as many different genres as is practical, but I also acknowledge that I'm just one person. There are genres I like more than other genres, so certain categories of music are necessarily going to be more represented than some others. But nevertheless, hopefully there's something there for everyone. And the idea is that if you're listening to these things via a streaming service, which I'm assuming you will be, because if you already own the albums and you've needed to be reminded to listen to them, something's gone wrong. If you listen to them and you like what you hear, straight at the bottom of all those streaming services is going to be you may also like functionality. So each of the albums is intended to be a jumping off point to take you to a number of other artists and a number of other people who have either taken that style a bit further or simply, if it's a good style, shamelessly ape it. So it should hopefully, and I keep using the word hopefully because this is a brave new world for things I've done for AVForums. It should generate the ability to find new music to keep us, from climbing the walls and being extremely bored. The one exception to that is a band I've listed in the 90s section who have the slightly strange name called Soul Coughing. No one has sounded like Soul Coughing either before or after. If you like the way that album sounds, and I genuinely do, I think it's a masterpiece, I'm afraid that basically you're just going to have to listen to more Soul Coughing. Because nothing has ever sounded like that before or since. But everything else, generally speaking, you should be able to find something else to enjoy and listen to. And I am 99% sure that all 50 albums are available across all major streaming services. So it shouldn't matter which one you're subscribed to. You should be able to enjoy all of them. And I'm going to keep hammering this point because it's a point dear to my heart. A number of the artists involved are dead, and a number of the other artists involved are extremely wealthy. So they probably aren't that bothered if you continue to listen on streaming services. A number of the others, especially in the more recent end of things, will be incredibly grateful if you actually then decide to purchase the album, if you love it, either via physical media purchase or, again, by looking at sites like Bandcamp. The Qobuz streaming service has an excellent online store which does proper artist royalties, and it'll be to their benefit, and you get a physical copy, or at least a hard copy of the material for you to enjoy at your leisure.
Ed, I said this last week or the week before when we were discussing music and your choices. I'm really having to keep my choices lively and fun and energetic because I don't like listening to anything that's a bit slow and melancholy and so on at the minute. What about you? Are you finding that you're going back to favourites, or are you actually exploring more?
I did exploring in the first phase of this. I have been pushing back. Favourites is the wrong word. I have been revisiting stuff which I probably ploughed through in the last 18 to 24 months. Well, yeah, that's fine, and stuck it to one side. And I'm sort of revisiting it now and giving it a longer listen and sort of taking it from there. So it varies, but then equally, the other day I sat down and listened to there's ironically, I need to explain this. I am a huge fan of The Shaman, the band, and the people that did Ebenezer Good. They did so many other things. They genuine innovators, and one of their albums does feature in the list of 50 albums. But I also decided to do the I decided to have a proper Shaman marathon the other day, all on vinyl, because I own an embarrassing amount of it on vinyl. So it varies. I have to be honest, I'm not quite the same as you, Phil. A lot of the music I choose to listen to is calmer, something along the lines of the material I put together for the self-isolating and new article I did a little while back. Stuff like that allows me to turn off social media for a bit, keep television off, and all the rest of it. And for an appreciable period of time, I'm not concerned about the wider world. It's more insular, it's more considered, it's calmer. But I appreciate that doesn't work for everyone. And it's not just you I've spoken to. A number of people have been going with the high energy dance music routine. And Dark Core Studio, just seen your one come in. Boss Drum is a great album. And if you have it on vinyl, you've got the better version of Ebenezer Good, because it's not the same as the radio edit. If you're interested in that sort of thing, have a look and see if you can find a used copy of Different Drum, which isn't on any of the streaming services, which is the accompanying remixes and extended cuts from that, which is very, very good indeed. Well worth a listen.
Steve, how have you been dealing with isolation and self-isolation and music and so on? Have you been listening to just Bowie, or have you been expanding your horizons?
No, I've been listening to the same 5 songs for the last 30 years.
Right.
I admire your honesty there, Steve. That's good. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I mean, honestly, if I buy something new, it's only new in the sense it's been released by someone who's been dead for about 20 years, probably. I'm not up on new music. I think everything. I mean, I've heard of The Shaman, but pretty much everything that you've mentioned, I'm like, who?
Well, I mean, this is the whole. To go back to this, the point is that this list is desperately trying to tread a fine line between trying to bring something new to people's attentions and not disappear firmly up its own arse. Because if you want to do that, there are a number of other music site providers who seem to specialize in it. And the other thing I can't be doing with is disliking something simply because it is popular. And if something's good, then it's good. and that's always
Yeah.
going to be a subjective take. But this whole I dislike them once they sold out business. Well, no, it's not that. If they managed to come up with something that managed to capture the public's imagination, good for them. It doesn't change what they did.
Okay, Cas, what about you? Are you into your music? Actually, have you got time to listen to music? Because you watch a lot of TV.
I listen to a lot of music, yeah. I mean, I can't say that it hasn't been recently more influenced by stuff the kids will listen to, which will be charts. My poison of choice is probably something more trancey, In Search of Sunrise, something like that. But my old school favourites have always been things like Massive Attack, DJ Shadow, a few ones that I think Ed would approve of. And I have to say, all the music I listen to now almost always comes inspired by the movies I'm watching. So I've got the Spies in Disguise soundtrack on, and I like it.
There is a DJ Shadow album in the list. It's not introducing, and that reminds me that you inquired about the Pi soundtrack, and I need to get that sorted as well. Not in a piracy sense, simply to tell you where you can listen to all the bits.
Craig, what about you? What kind of music have you been listening to lately?
Today's been extremely random. I knew that question was coming, so I was just reminding myself on Spotify. This morning I went with two albums I was listening to today. One is The Proclaimers, Sunshine on Leaf. That's a
Cracking.
That was a big part of my childhood, that one. Second one was Paul Simon, Graceland. Also a classic. My mum used to love Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. It's a big song in our house. So it was my childhood I was reliving today. My parents making me listen to those kind of albums.
It was the first CD my dad ever bought, Graceland. And it would have been no more than a couple of weeks after release. My dad was the fancy pants bloke who went for CD whilst everyone was going, it's never going to catch on.
I got CD in '84.
Yes, I know, but you were one, involved in finance, and B, where were you living?
Not then. I wasn't. I was a student.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
In fact, no, I was still at school. How old do you think I am?
You're extremely old.
No, I got a CD player in '84, and I only had one CD because that's all I could afford. It was Brothers in Arms. So I listened
You amaze me.
A lot, and I haven't listened to it since because I know it so well I can bear to hear it again.
Craig, you should hear Sunshine on Leaf when it's sung by 40,000 Hebbies at Hampden after winning the Cup. That's one of the lifetime experiences for me. I was absolutely
crying on that day.
Crying my eyes out.
To be fair, 40,000 people singing anything.
Yeah, no, it's just something about that song and the fact that they were in the crowd as well. And it was the first cup we'd won in a long time. I'm talking about the 5-1 win in the League Cup, not the Scottish Cup. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to the Scottish Cup, but I was at Hampden for that, and it was it's just one of those. It's one of those songs. It does it every time. I well up every time I hear that. Really
we did listen to it driving around Las Vegas, which was incredibly surreal a couple of years ago. In terms of mismatch, I thought that was quite nice, but effective nonetheless.
Right, I think we need to talk films if we're keeping time this evening. So we'll be back in a second with some movies. I'm hoping Stuart played the thing there because I can't hear anything in my earphones. Normally Stuart counts me in. I didn't hear any counting that time, so I'm assuming that the music's over and that we're back with the movie section. So let's crack on, Cas, with the movies.
Sure.
Not a lot of releases, but there was one that you managed to catch up on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, out of the blue. I think it was scheduled for release in March. I certainly remember seeing the posters around the cinema. But obviously everything happened and it disappeared off the schedule. I can't say I was crying a river over it, but Dave Bautista's latest comedy, My Spy, suddenly popped up on Amazon. And if you can look through the Amazon app, it's actually in 4K HDR. So So it's worth checking out, because I had no expectations whatsoever. I mean, it's Dave Bautista and a 9-year-old girl getting into trouble in, I suppose, a family comedy is what I expected. But I really enjoyed it. It's a very kindergarten cop, as you might expect, but it's also got a very self-aware style to it. It sends up a lot of movies. There's one particularly good montage that's stayed out of Spy Game, with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt, and I thought it was very funny and good action scenes. And Dave Bautista's, he's got a good comic side to him, so it was a pleasant surprise. As I say, I had zero expectations, so everyone reading my review is going to come in with expectations and probably not enjoy it. But I didn't expect it to be very much very good or very worth anybody's time, and it is, and it's a nice edition in 4K. I just wish they'd maybe announce it a bit in advance, because they keep doing these last minute drops, and I'm not really sure they're advertised very well for movies that they expect to promote their channels. But yeah, that's on Amazon Prime, and that's the only new big release that I can see at the moment.
Okay, good stuff. We're going to have to sort your microphone a little bit, Cas, because it is still a little bit wayward. So I don't know if you want to bring it down towards your mouth a little bit, because it is just slightly quiet. That should be a little bit better. So let's move on to disc releases. 4K reviews. 4K releases and Blu-ray. What have we got coming up disc-wise?
Okay, we've only got one this week, and that's, well, actually, it's last week. We didn't mention it. It's 47 Ronin, and we didn't mention it because it's not on a mainstream release. It's only available as an exclusive Zavvi Steelbook. So although the US are getting it in a standard Amray release, we're only getting the Steelbook version. It's not an expensive Steelbook. It's the same price as probably you'd pay for some premium titles in Amray, but it is coming out, and as a back catalogue title, it's probably only fans who were wanting to pick it up in advance of a mainstream release. But that's the Keanu Reeves film 47 Ronin, and I have checked it out. It looks beautiful in 4K and with DTSX track. It's up to you whether or not you enjoy the film. I mean, I have to say,
I noticed that you were stepping around that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Last Samurai, which was the Tom Cruise one, and I know that it butts up against my familiarity with and love for traditional Japanese samurai movies. I mean, Last Samurai isn't Yojimbo, but I do like Tom Cruise, and I do like what they did in Last Samurai, and I can see how Keanu Reeves was kind of hoping to capture that same magic, but unfortunately literally introduced magic into it. So there's a lot of CG and a lot of magic, a lot of fantasy, and it's an odd mix. It's not what you expect. So if you're expecting it to be a decent, straightforward samurai flick with a mainstream Hollywood actor in it, then it isn't. It's more of a mishmash of Last Samurai and Pirates of the Caribbean or something like that. If you drop your expectations, it's actually quite good fun. I did enjoy it. It's just doesn't do any justice to the tale of the 47 Ronin, which is one of the most famous stories in Japanese history. And it's not really about the 47 Ronin. It's about whether you can have a CG dragon fight Keanu Reeves with a sword. And taken to be that, it's actually quite enjoyable. It's just not 47 Ronin.
It does have the dubious honour of being one of the biggest money losers of all time.
It does, yeah. Well, it's another one that's not really sold very well, is it? It's got a bunch of samurai.
They should have sold it as Keanu Reeves with a sword against a dragon. That sounds great.
Yes, they should have maybe done that. But I can see similar problems with things like John Carter, particularly when they dropped the From Mars thing, and they don't know how to sell these movies quite as well. You know what you get when you go into Pirates of the Caribbean. And
if it slides, I agree with you. If it slides down the gap between genres,
yeah,
people lose the ability to actually work out how best to put that to another audience.
Yes, well, King Arthur. I mean, Guy Ritchie did King Arthur, which I have to say I enjoy, because Guy Ritchie did a Guy Ritchie, and he has weird timelines and very fast speak. And,
David Beckham.
David Beckham. But he also, doesn't he have like giant elephants and massive CG battles? I mean, it just seems unnecessary for for a Guy Ritchie King Arthur movie, and it feels a little bit like that's what they did with 47 Ronin. Great classic tale. Let's have some giant CG beasts in it. Fine, okay, but it's not quite what you're expecting.
Okay, good stuff.
Okay.
And Blu-ray wise, what have we got coming out in Blu-ray?
Yeah, there's a whole host of things. The Boys Season 1 is out on Blu-ray for those who didn't catch it on Amazon. It's also in our competitions. Jojo Rabbit is on Blu-ray. We reviewed that recently.
Are we not getting a 4K release on that, Cas?
We're not getting a 4K release, and I did bring that up in the review. I have to say that the Blu-ray does a stand-up job competing against Amazon's 4K, because there is a disparity between streaming 4K and disc 4K. But it is a bit of a shame that we don't get a full-fat 4K release HDR. The works. I can kind of see why they don't do it, but no, we're not getting one. We also got Lola Montez from Criterion. That's in a competition. Empathy Inc. from Arrow. Fistful of Dynamite from Eureka. There's a competition for that. Blood Tide from Arrow, and Thousand Eyes of Dr. Mabuse from Eureka. Also a competition for that.
Mabuse, I think.
Mabuse. There you go. Yep.
Okay, good stuff. And wrapping up the movie and TV section, we've got streaming and TV releases. What can we binge watch, Cas?
Well, you can watch The Wrong Missy on Netflix. I watched the trailer. I can't say I'm going to take one for the team here, but we'll see. we'll see.
What's it about?
Okay.
What is it?
It's a guy who he texts someone that he wants to take on this amazing second date to a luxury holiday somewhere amazing, and he texts the wrong girl for a second date. So rather than going on this holiday with this supermodel he was expecting, who he got on really well with, he goes on with the worst date of his life, this really awkward girl who's very loud and he didn't ever want to see again, but he's taking her to this fabulous resort. So, I mean, it looks vaguely funny. I can't say. It's the guy from... Nope, not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you because I can't remember his name. All I know is he's wearing a really bad wig in it.
Oh, excellent.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
Well, you've really sold that one, Cas.
Well,
I think.
you know what? It looked vaguely funny from the trailer, but I can't say I'm going to rush out and watch it and take it. It's David Spade. That's it. And he's got a really, really, really bad wig in it. And the Missy he's taken is Lauren Lapkus, who I actually think is really funny. She's in Big Bang Theory. I'm sure I've seen her in something else, but I think she's really funny, and she's what will make me want to watch it. I do like David Spade, but I wasn't getting on well with his wig. But we'll see. We'll see if I check that out. There's also White Lines season 1 on Netflix, which is looking promising. From what I can tell, it's there's been someone's died, and that girl has to go and look into it in a hedonistic island resort and gets sucked into drugs and drink and partying.
I think it's set on Ibiza, isn't it?
Yeah, so
to be more precise.
To be more precise. Well, I haven't watched the trailer yet, but it looks interesting. I'm kind of trying to go into it blind as much as I can to see what it's like. Unlike The Wrong Missy, where I needed to know as much as I could about it.
Okay, so
right.
So we're up to date with everything now. Time for a question and answer section. So hopefully people have been putting the questions into the window here, and we can go through that and find out exactly what people are asking. So first of all, I'm going to go to you, Craig. Is there anything that's been put in there that you've been watching coming through that has taken your interest?
Antoine Malouf, he asked about the Q80T, the European version versus the US version. He was specifically talking about the anti-reflection screen. The Q80T does not have the anti-reflection screen technology in the European version. Okay,
good stuff. There you go.
I saw Guzzo. This is one for us, Phil. Do we recommend either the Epson TW9 or the JVC N5? Very different price points.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you can stretch to the N5,
get it.
Then it's a native projector 4K. JVC haven't picked theirs up yet. I've still got it here. Great, I'm not complaining. This lockdown can last as long as it likes if I get to play with toys like that for it. So, if you can afford it, the N5 is a cracking machine. I haven't actually seen the 94, the TW94 myself, but you have, Steve.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I say, it's very different price points. So if you've got over $5,000 to spend, and you want a native 4K projector with really good HDR, then definitely, as Phil says, the JVC N5 is definitely worth investigating. Sub $3,000, no question in my mind. TW9400 is an absolute bargain. It's a really good projector. It's not native 4K. It uses Epson's version of eShift effectively. But the picture quality is fantastic. It's very accurate image. The HDR is really good. It's got all the features. It's got lens memory. Even got a lens cover, a motorized lens cover. So it's feature packed. It's very competitively priced, and it's a really good performer. It's no question in my mind that in that sub £3,000 price point, that's the projector to get.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Even though I haven't seen the 9400.
You saw the 9300.
Yeah, the Epsons I've seen. Yeah, the Epsons I've seen have been absolutely fantastic projectors and well worth the money. And actually, I've got to say, I'm looking at a BenQ TK 850 at the minute, and it's really surprised me. It's £1,300. It has a dynamic iris, it has frame interpolation, and a few other bits and pieces for that money. And the blacks don't suck. I mean, they're DLP black levels, but they're not terrible because of the dynamic iris. So the review for that will be coming up next week, and we'll probably talk about it on next week's podcast. But if you're looking for a really cheap projector that can do most things, including 3D, which is projector-wise is still a big thing. It's really surprised me this week. I've been doing a lot of testing with it and so on. So yeah, the review will be up. Any other questions, Ed? Anything audio-wise that's been asked?
The only thing that was flagged up, Hypnotoad, all glory to the Hypnotoad, did point out, and I did forget to say, obviously, rest in peace, Florian Schneider of Kraftwerk.
Yeah. And Little Richard.
Richard. Two wildly different individuals in wildly different genres of music, but they were both absolute pioneers. It's worth pointing out, Kraftwerk is maddening because Schneider's most interesting work in terms of just the building blocks of electronic music that we take for granted. The first two Kraftwerk albums, they have a traffic cone on the front, have been out of press for donkey's years, and they're not on streaming services because of an argument with the label and Ralph. I think it's Ralph, the last surviving original member of Kraftwerk, and so on and so forth. I have a copy of the first one, and I need to be clear about this. Like so much early electronic music, it's not a great listen, but it's when you then chart it against the year that it is and think that, God, this is earlier, older than Dark Side of the Moon. It's in the work that they were doing and having to create all their own instruments to actually do it. It wasn't like they just wandered off and bought Ableton Live to make it work. They had to do it from scratch. And Little Richard, I actually potted through his Wikipedia biography last night because I was a bit loose on two things, but his early life and what he did between being a megastar in the 50s and then sort of reappearing. And the answer apparently is lots of drugs. But nevertheless, what a life. And again, an absolute pioneer.
Did he not become a preacher?
Yeah.
He had a brief phase with religion, and then another.
He got very religious. He was openly gay at a time when it was certainly not just not fashionable, but illegal in many states in the US. And but later on in life became quite religious, and then said that he was no longer gay, which I'm not entirely sure I believe. He led a very rock and roll lifestyle until his conversion to religion.
Yeah, influenced a lot of artists as well. You can hear his influences. And
he practically invented rock and roll.
And also, performed, and right up until no more than about 2 years ago. Which is no mean feat. So yeah, hats off to him on that one. And yeah, both sorely missed, although both lived interesting and meaningful lives. So there's a degree of sadness, but a degree of a life well lived as well.
There's a question from Gustavo. It's aimed at you and I, Phil, but I guess Craig might have some input here as well. Stephen, Phil, what is your choice between Dolby Vision and HDR10 Plus? Which one would you choose?
I am assuming that you're asking that on a performance level. And if it is on a performance level, the front-to-end system that Dolby has in place is very, very, very impressive. They basically do the HDR grading, and then it's all worked out from there in terms of your 709 pass and any other passes that they need to do. And then it's physically checked, which is a big difference to other systems out there that they'll do an HDR pass and then let a computer work it out. These are actually checked as well. And then once they leave Dolby all the way through the system, as long as everything works the way it should work, you should be seeing a version as close as possible to what was seen in the grading suite. And having been to Dolby Soho Square and had a look at the grading suite and the Pulsar monitor and so on, it's impressive. It's really, really impressive. HDR 10 Plus, it works, but when I've done side-by-sides, I've always preferred the Dolby Vision version. I've found that HDR 10 Plus does tend to have a hard clip built into how it does things, which means that you do lose details in the top. What about you, Steve?
I think in terms of the specs, you're right. Dolby Vision is the superior format. I mean, it is capable, for example, of 12-bit, whereas HDR10 Plus is limited to 10-bit. I appreciate that's not necessarily an issue right now, but it is going forward. I think the bigger issue for me is just there isn't very much HDR10 Plus content around. If you actually look at who uses Dolby Vision, it's pretty uniform now. I mean, not just Netflix, but also Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, Amazon to a degree, and some other streaming services as well. I think Vudu uses it. And obviously on disc, it tends to be, I mean, there are discs that have HDR10 Plus as well. Some have both. Warner Brothers particularly have been doing both now. But one of the big supporters was 20th Century Fox. Since they've been bought by Disney, they've essentially stopped doing it on their discs. So I think the issue is becoming moot to a degree because there's just less and less HDR10 Plus content compared to Dolby Vision content. So what do you think, Craig?
What do I think? So which compensation technology is the best? I would opt for the TV that didn't need compensation technology at all. If
Good answer.
If I could choose. So I think on a serious note, I mean that's where we have to get to. I mean, we have to remember these technologies are effectively there because the hardware is unable to deliver the source material in all of its glory. So I would rather have a TV which could do that. And I think from the Samsung point of view, I've seen content, just HDR10 content graded at 1000 nits looks much better than any content on a 500 nit TV, regardless of whether it has Dolby Vision or HDR10 Plus. So I think that's my view, but it's very much a personal view, I think, for each consumer, and you should really go and test these out. But just having that as a de facto, will I have a TV with this or without? There are too many other variables when selecting the television that it's impossible really to answer that question, or it should be anyway.
Okay, thanks for your answer there, Craig. It is appreciated. We're looking through the questions while we do that. Just before we finish off, Philip has donated £17.69. Philip, thank you very much. That really is appreciated. Mm-hmm. And Stephen Huxtable, £1.99. He asked, what is the future of 8K, Craig?
The future of 8K is an expanded market, an expanded ecosystem. I think it will quite quickly become the majority of panels available in larger screen sizes above certain price points. So much like when we move from standard definition to full HD to 4K, and now to 8K, it will happen. It will happen in the cycle. And I think the best picture quality will be reserved for those flagship models. It just happens to go hand in hand with the resolution improvement as well. So yeah, I see it having a big year this year. This is the third year. So if you look at any of the previous cycles that have gone on, the third year is normally one of the biggest breakouts for any new resolution. So I think that will happen this year. And then going 2021 and beyond, yeah, I think it will be, as I say, the majority of the premium market will be 8K.
Steve, does 8K interest you?
Well, in terms of native 8K content, I mean, I'm not a big gamer, and I guess 8K gaming could very well be a thing very soon. So that would be interesting if I was a gamer. In terms of movies, obviously 8K doesn't really exist in terms of cinema or TV production at the moment. That might change, of course. What does interest me, and what has impressed me, shall I say, and this goes back to something that Craig was just talking about, is certainly with the Q950TS, the fact that I was watching 4K content on it, the upscaling, and the fact it had more pixels to play with, 33 million, and the quality of the upscaling was genuinely impressive. I mean, I was really impressed with that TV and what it was doing. I mean, stuff that I'd seen, a lot of times, because we use the same stuff for, reviewing the same content over and over again. Some of it just looked like, I was seeing things I'd never noticed before. And that was also true with the HDR content, because as we said at the beginning of this podcast, the higher the peak brightness, the less tone mapping that's required. And certainly with a lot of the HDR content I was watching on the Q950, it looked absolutely stunning. So yes, 8K as a resolution, as a native source, less so than as a potential for just using the upscaling in a really effective manner.
Yeah, it's interesting on the HDR question, because I think we've mentioned it a few times now that one of the best demos I've seen at CES in a number of years was Sony's 10,000 nit display. Now we already know that there was loads of electronics and cooling and everything else going on behind the screen that you couldn't see from the show floor, but just seeing something in 10,000 nits, it was really, really impressive. And it wasn't in the case of it was going to give you a suntan. It was just, it looked like looking at real life. Things looked real. Edges, surfaces looked real. So what Craig's saying there about a TV being able to do 1,000 nits without tone mapping, and eventually, hopefully, 4,000 nits and above without having to do much in the way of tone mapping, the level of performance that's available when you see that, and it's not about the brightness, it's just about making images look realistic, really realistic. And I know it's a cliche, but it is like looking out the window or looking at something in real life. And if we can get to that standard, especially with high frame rate with sports, and HDR on top of that, it's going to be like sitting in the stadium looking at the sports, because it mimics how the human eye sees things.
Because there'll be a professional seeing what you see rather than you being distracted or staring at the back of someone's head.
Yeah, but again, it works. It follows more of how you see things in reality, and if we can get that. And get to that stage, and we've seen it in demos. If the technology gets there, especially with something like, we haven't really touched on it, Craig, micro LED. Again, what really impressed me on the CES show floor when we were recording the interview, that we did that next to the big micro LED sets, and just the level of brightness, but also absolute pixel level black like you get from OLED. It's something else. It really is, and it again, it opens up the possibilities of what you can do with the image.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, like you, I've seen many demonstrations over the years, and nothing's quite impacted the same way that the micro LED demonstrations have. It's really unbelievable, and when you see that, you really understand how we can make a television display exactly as your eyes would see something in the outside world. So I think there'll be more on that coming very soon. We announced we will launch more screen sizes this year. We showed a variety of screen sizes at CES, and there's no doubt in my mind that is a technology that will dominate in years to come.
I also noticed there was a question, you don't have to answer this, Craig, but there was a question about quantum dot OLED. Is that still something that may happen?
Yeah, I definitely can't answer that one or add much to it. Other than, I do see that's the second most asked question, closely after the Dolby Vision one. I wish I could give a categorical answer, but yeah, let's wait and see.
I've got a question, Craig, I forgot to ask you earlier, which hopefully you can answer, because last week Samsung finally released its EARC update for its 2019 Q soundbars, the Q70, 80, and 90. Are you going to release an EARC update for the QLED TVs from last year, and if so, when?
Yes, it has been confirmed. Just waiting to get an exact date on that, but we have promised. I believe it's the Q85R and the Q90R that will be done. The models which supported the One Connect box. It's going to be happening soon. As soon as we can get a fixed date on that, I'll let you guys know, and you can obviously let the audience. But yeah, something that we're definitely working on.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so briefly, we need to wrap things up. There are still some questions there. Let's move to some movie stuff. I did notice there was a couple of movie questions there, Cas.
Yeah, there are. Anyone got Flash Gordon 4K on pre-order?
Yep.
I was just talking to the.
What do you mean, Flash Gordon approaching?
Camp Sci-Fi. Of course, Steve's got it on order.
Studio Canal are handling this, so that means back catalogue title, 4K restoration, very nice job, and guaranteed Dolby Vision. And I was just online with the PR company this morning, and they're gonna get that to us, and hopefully maybe even a 4K competition. So
these special effects may or may not have some limitations of 4K HDR. I'm just saying that is not my area of speciality.
Yeah, I mean the special Blu-ray, was it a couple of years ago now? It was still fantastic. It's really camp. The effects are absolutely terrible,
even for the time it came out. I mean, that said,
terrible.
Seeing Ornella,
the Queen soundtrack's terrible, but it all melds together into something that's fantastic.
The Queen soundtrack and Brian Blessed in Dolby Atmos.
Oh, die!
I was more
Gordon's alive!
I was more thinking about, no, not Dolby Atmos bit. In terms of 4K HDR, Ornella Muti in 4K HDR is agreeable. But,
yes.
you know.
I have to say, though, in the comments, the one that got me was 2 lines below that, which is Germany are getting a 4K release of Crying Freeman, and that shows my niche. As nice as it is about Flash Gordon, I can't believe that we're getting Crying Freeman on 4K. For those who don't know, that's Christoph Gans, one of his first movies, and it's Mark Dacascos, who most people probably know from John Wick 3, but he's a phenomenal martial artist, and it's a crazy adaptation of the manga. And a 4K release, I mean, I know that Germany means probably no English subtitles, but it's one of these titles that I'm sure I'd get even if it didn't have anything. Because half of it's in foreign languages, so I'm sure I've got a French release kicking around somewhere, and you know how the French don't like putting anyone else's subtitles on their disc. So yeah, I can't wait for that, if that's true.
I agree with you, Hypnotoad. Becca missed acting what his missus is to singing. Yeah, I think you're right there. That's very true. Just looking what else there is.
Quick question about ceiling speakers for Atmos. Kevin Davis, who apparently I calibrated his 77C9 back in January. Hi, Kevin.
What do you mean apparently? Do you not remember?
No, there were quite a few in January. So I don't actually. Sorry, Kevin.
He's getting old.
I don't even remember going to Portsmouth. So, but I tell you what, January seems like a very, very, very long time ago at the moment.
Yes, that's fair.
Anyway, Kevin, in answer to your question about Atmos ceiling speakers, do you want 2 or 4? I go 4 personally. My suggestion. I know you're using 2, aren't you, Phil?
Yeah, 7.4.2.
But if you can get 2 up there, if you can get 4 up there, go for it. I don't know. I can't remember now what kind of system you're using. So like we said last week, you know, if you're tossing up between 5.1.4 or 7.1.2, the extra 2 speakers at the rear are vital in order to give you an immersive experience. Otherwise, there's a big hole in the soundstage behind you. So so bear that in mind. But yeah, I've got 6 on the ceiling, so the more you can get up there, the better. That's what I think.
Well, I've got to say, the next time I upgrade the room, I am going to put 4 up on the ceiling. I'm definitely going to go that route next time. Yeah, just looking here, what's your opinion on the Sony 4K 760 ES compared to the JVC? I am assuming you mean the JVC that we've been talking about, the N5. Sony, great projector. 760 ES was a really good projector, in fact. There's not a lot in it between them other than the tone mapping for HDR. And this is where JVC really have, I think, the game changer at the minute, which is frame adapt. And it really does work in terms of displaying HDR content as good as you can get it on a projector. Remember, there's not enough stops on a projector in terms of what it can do in terms of HDR and dynamic range. But in terms of what you can do with it, the JVCs really have nailed it with frame adapt. Obviously, I'm spending time with this N5 until JVC finally pick it up. But you own an M7, Steve, which is the next one up, which does wide colour. It's got the filter and so on. Yeah. You still enjoying it?
Love it. I was watching Bad Boys for Life last week, and which is a surprisingly good.
You watch a lot of quality films, I've got to say, Steve.
No, Bad Boys for Life, I've got to say, it's surprisingly good. It is,
yeah. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, yeah.
I was not expecting a film that required actual acting from either of them. Although, the heavy lifting is done by Will Smith in the action stakes, because Martin Lawrence looks like a hamster with the mumps for most of that film. But no, it was really good. And the picture, awesome. It was stunning on the N7. I hadn't seen a film for a couple of weeks on it, for about a week or so on it, and I'd forgotten. And it was like, blimey, that looks good. So, and also a fantastic soundtrack. So yes, very, very happy with the N7. Still very happy with it.
Kevin Davis is saying, Steve, I gave you the discs. Do you remember them now?
Yeah, I do. Yes. No, I actually, sorry, Kevin. I did actually thank you on the podcast back in January for the discs that you gave me, including almost the entire Friday the 13th movies, which I do enjoy and did watch. Quick question, and maybe Craig can answer this, maybe not. It's not really his area, but Simon in Greece has asked about the replacement for because so far the only flagship soundbar that I've heard about or seen from Samsung has been the Q800, and he's asking if there's going to be a replacement for the Q90, the HW Q90R this year. Do you know that if there is one in the pipeline, Craig?
I think there'll be further product announcements with regards to sound in the coming months.
Okay. I think there's been stuff I've seen online suggesting there is something in the pipeline, because the 800 doesn't have the rear speakers, which is obviously one of the big selling points of the Q90. So, yeah, I expect there will be at some point, Simon. But I haven't personally seen or heard about it yet, but I have seen stuff from other people online where they've seen stuff behind the scenes. So,
yeah,
sure it will.
Gustavo, why Sky does not offer HDR. It is a bit puzzling, and it was supposed to be HDR by now, but it has been delayed again, I believe, till the end of this year. And it could be that present climate has pushed that back even further. I don't know. But the last I heard, it was supposed to be end of the year, and I've got Sky Q. And I've got to say, in terms of a platform, I think Sky Q is fantastic. What you can do, what you can look up, box sets and all that kind of thing, catch-up TV, it's great. What's really annoying is the picture quality. For a company that was leading the curve for a long time in terms of Premiership football and how they were developing, how content was shown and all the rest of it, I don't know what's happened at Sky. They don't seem to be innovating as much as they used to. And in terms of their 4K that I've watched so far, and I've mentioned it a few times on the podcast now, I'm really disappointed with the compression. Compression is not great, especially in the blacks where you get lots of posterization and other artifacts happening. And it's not the system I've got here, because I've seen other people with Sky Q and their systems, and it's there. It's unfortunately the compression that they're using, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with HDR, because they are, I think, the only major provider other than the BBC who online anyway who don't do HDR, because Netflix
BBC
do, Amazon
does HDR.
They do HLG, yeah.
HLG.
it's only certain programs, but at least they are pushing it out. So yeah, it's a strange one, that one, but hopefully Sky will eventually come round to this one. And before we wrap up, because we just have hit past, any other questions that anybody's noticed?
This Fueled Funny is asking about an upgrade for the Epson LS10000. At that price point, yeah, he actually says presumably a JVC N5 or N7.
Just be aware that they're bulb projectors
as opposed to laser.
As opposed to laser with your Epson. So, again, with anything like this, you
just
really
finish your dragster, mate, and you won't have to worry about the whole.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. You know,
just get the dragster out.
Yeah, don't spend money on a projector. Get your funny car.
That's John, isn't it?
Ready. It is John. Yeah,
Funny's John.
Yeah. Get your funny car finished, and yeah. Right, so I think we've gone through all the questions that have been asked this evening. I've noticed there's been constantly about 60 odd people watching this evening. Number has gone up and down, but obviously when you're up against the Prime Minister and what's happening at the minute in terms of lockdown and so on, I think that's not too bad that we've had that number of people watching. So thanks very much for spending the evening with us. Hopefully you've got something out of this evening's podcast, and if you listen to the audio version as well, please leave your comments and questions for the next podcast in the thread below. You see, when we record this, I can cut out all the bits that I get wrong. Done a couple this evening.
Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and like.
Donate. Yeah, and do super chat and so on. It's all there for you to do. And we're going to do this. Hopefully the audio's been fine. I haven't seen anybody mention that they were having any issues with audio, and apart from Kaz's mic, which we need to fix for next week. I think we need to get you another headset, Kaz, something that's going to work there. But hopefully it's sounded a lot better this week. And yeah, we're going to do this every week, so you can tune in and see our ugly mugs every week. Craig, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. You have been the first guest to ever join us on a video call, a video podcast. Hopefully you've enjoyed it.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you for the invite. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Craig.
You're more than welcome any other time. And also, I need to thank Ed Selley.
I don't hit senior citizens.
Cas Harlow.
You're either very smart or incredibly stupid.
Steve Withers.
Are you guys talking about sex?
And special guest, Craig Cunningham.
Credibility. It's the only currency that means anything on this kind of playing field.
Helps if I turn my microphone up. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Bookback. I'll get used to this live thing eventually. Bookmark AVForums for the latest views, news and video. Plus, leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes, but only if you enjoyed the show. Also, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And yeah, we've got loads of reviews and live podcasts coming up there. So I'm Phil Hinton. Am I? Yes, I am. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and you will see us again next week.